My wife decided to leave me just 2 weeks after our marriage. I'm struggling to understand the reasons behind her decision. I am a Korean American who was raised in the US. During my 20s, I went to South Korea, where I was teaching English classes. During this time, I met a charming Korean girl in the same building where we worked. Initially, our connection was only based on friendship, but as time passed, our bond deepened, and we transitioned into a romantic relationship. Our love was so deep that we, maybe foolishly, decided to get married after just 3 months of dating. Our honeymoon took us to Guam, and upon our return, we bought an apartment in Korea, embarking on the journey of married life together. The early days of our marriage were filled with joy and happiness. I can remember countless hours of laughter and hugging. It were the simple pleasures that brought us happiness, creating a wonderful and intimate connection. 2 weeks after our wedding, an unexpected and shocking incident occurred. My wife returned from grocery shopping, and out of the blue, she went into a fit of rage. Her face turned red, and she began screaming at me, tossing the groceries all over the floor. This sudden and uncharacteristic outburst left me shocked. This was so sudden and random that I did not even get angry. More was I worried that there might be something seriously wrong with her. Attempting to calm her down, I reached out to my mother-in-law, who advised me to send my wife back to Daegu, the town where her family lives. My mother-in-law and my wife had an hour-long conversation over the phone, after which she insisted that my wife needed medical attention in Daegu. I tried suggesting that I would take her to a local hospital closer to where we live, but this made my mother-in-law go mad and urged me to bring her to Daegu. Confused about this whole ordeal, I gave in and drove my wife back to Daegu. During the journey, she seemed to regain her senses a bit, and after dropping her off, I returned home. Over the next 2 days, my attempts at contact were met with complete silence. Frustrated and desperate for answers, I called my wife, mother-in-law, father-in-law, her brother, and grandparents, but nobody answered. The lack of communication made me paranoid, and I decided to drive to Daegu to unravel this mystery. Upon my arrival, I was welcomed by my parents-in-law, sitting me down for a serious conversation. It was during this talk that they revealed a shocking revelation. My wife was grappling with severe mental illness and required long-term treatment. This explanation caught me completely off guard, and it made me go completely silent. Initially, I believed her behavior was a sudden stress-induced tantrum, similar to how some people might become bridezillas during wedding preparations. The revelation left me stunned, as during all this time I had never seen her go mad before and just refused to believe it. My parents-in-law suggested visiting the mental hospital, which I agreed to. I simply had to see it with my own eyes. Before meeting with the doctor, my mother-in-law sat me down and laid out 2 rules. 1. I was not allowed to disclose that I am her husband, and I had to pretend to be her cousin. 2. I would not ask questions. I was to simply listen to what the doctor had to say. Overwhelmed, I agreed to these conditions, as I just wanted to see my wife. When the doctor entered the room, he informed us that my wife was dealing with severe depression, depersonalization, and dissociative disorder. Apart from depression, I did not even know what these terms meant and wanted to ask a million of questions. However, before I had the chance, my mother-in-law abruptly ended the meeting, taking me away from the doctor and leading us outside. I observed her settling the hospital expenses in cash, opting not to use the Korean national health insurance. Later, I discovered that she took this approach in order to avoid leaving any paper trails in the national health insurance records. After the visit to the doctor, my parents-in-law told me that my wife's illness was a result of the wedding and marriage. They emphasized that I should have been more understanding and should treat her better. I apologized, and they instructed me to return and wait quietly. In Korean culture, particularly when it comes to in-laws, it's not considered respectful to go against their wishes, especially in the challenging circumstances my wife was facing. I believed it was best for her to leave the decision-making to them. Upon my return, the days passed, but no communication came my way. Feeling increasingly anxious, I attempted to reach out again, through various means, but I received no responses. Frustrated and desperate for answers, I decided to drive to my wife's brother's workplace to talk to him in person about the situation. Upon seeing me, he hastily ran downstairs to avoid me. Despite catching up to him, He seemed nervous and repeatedly insisted, "It's between you two. I don't know anything." Shocked by this encounter, I didn't pursue him further. Around 10 minutes later, my mother-in-law finally called me and urged me to leave her son alone, suggesting that I talk to her instead. She explained that my wife was still very unwell and needed more time before returning to me. She once again insisted that the best course of action for me was to patiently wait until she recovered. I agreed once again, and decided to give it some time before I would ask for new updates. After a week, my parents-in-law unexpectedly showed up at my door. My mother-in-law started to gather my wife's belongings when my father-in-law suddenly said, "You are not supposed to have oral intercourse." Shocked, I asked for an explanation. He then proceeded to tell me that my wife's sudden illness was a result of me forcing her into oral intercourse, implying it was a despicable act for which I should be ashamed. In disbelief, I explained that our intimate activities were consensual and without issues, and I stressed the privacy of our marital relationship. They refused to listen, however, insisting that engaging in oral intercourse is a terrible thing that could lead to mental illness in women. Frustrated, I finally snapped, yelling, "Well then, 99% of the world must be mentally unstable? Don't pretend you guys never do it." I then told them to leave, and they departed with some of my wife's belongings. A few days after them leaving, I suddenly found divorce papers in my mailbox. My wife was filing me for divorce and suing me for $20,000 in settlement. She claimed that I had continuously roped her during our 2-week marriage and emotionally and mentally abused her. She claimed that these actions led to her current mental conditions. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The woman I loved and had just recently married was now suing me, portraying me as some kind of American sex predator. She submitted recordings of our conversations, spanning from our first date to the present. It seems she had recorded our dates and phone calls continuously. She included parts of our conversations that portrayed me as a horny American during moments of harmless flirting or joking. I'm not certain if she recorded our intimate moments, but she didn't submit anything related to it, probably because there was no wrongdoing, just two people engaging in consensual, ordinary intimacy. I started to wonder if she was attempting to scam money from me the entire time, like a phony Asian marriage for social status or a quick lawsuit payout. But it didn't add up. I was just a struggling teacher without much money. My wife and her parents were fully aware of that, and it was her parents who willingly covered the apartment down payment and all the furniture expenses, while I covered the wedding costs. They spent well over $20,000 to help their daughter build a life with me. What the heck? None of it made sense. As if things were not bad enough already, South Korea was in the midst of the Me Too movement, and society was highly sensitive to women alleging sexual abuse. My wife exploited this situation, portraying herself as a vulnerable, submissive Korean woman who was defenseless against a predatory American man that deceived her into marriage and repeatedly assaulted her. It took me a while to recover, but eventually I gathered myself and hired a lawyer to counter her claims. Unfortunately, the odds were not in my favor, as it boiled down to her words and recordings against my words, and domestic cases involving sexual abuse were heavily favoring women in Korea at that time. Luckily for me, she made a critical error during our trial. She claimed that I had threatened her near her place at a specific time, but I had an alibi, and Korea's widespread CCTV coverage could prove my whereabouts. This incident undermined her credibility, and the judge ultimately ruled in my favor. The domestic abuse charge was dismissed, and her request for a $20,000 settlement was denied. After this trial, I was reflecting to myself. The result was that I was married for only 2 weeks and quickly divorced. While I technically won the lawsuit, it felt like a hollow victory. What was all this for? I am so confused. Is it possible for mental disorders to surface so rapidly over just 2 weeks of marriage? Was she hiding it from me, her family, or both? And why were they recording everything? Initially, it seemed like she genuinely wanted the marriage to succeed. However, at the first sign of conflict, both her and her parents distanced themselves and took legal action against me. I'm stunned. My life is in pieces. Now, 5 years later, I am still struggling to rebuild my life. Trusting others has become a challenge. Night after night, my mind is consumed by speculations and endless questions. I truly loved this woman, believing she loved me too. Those initial 2 weeks seemed like a great start until she abruptly left and filed a lawsuit against me. The lingering questions haunt me. Why did they do this? Were they hoping for the best while simultaneously preparing for the worst? And why put all the blame on me? I realize that all these questions I will probably never get an answer to. Thanks for letting me share my story. I wish you the best. Take care.